When my husband and I were 4 years married, he invited a close friend named Brian and his wife, Audra, out to Steamboat Springs so that we could all hang out for a week. I didn't know Brian and Audra, but my husband, Dale, had said they were the coolest couple on earth. So with high expectations, we all hung out. And I got to know both of them, and I did think they were pretty darn cool. We tried to show them a good time. We took them out on an ATV ride. And I decided to take their oldest daughter, and Brian took their oldest son. And since we only had 2 ATVs, we took them down a little side path. And as we found the road was a little rockier, a little scarier than we anticipated, I realized in my nervousness to show how great of an off-roading woman I was, I had forgotten to flip it down into 4-wheel drive. It was still in 2-wheel drive. So I'm navigating all these things, but pretty soon, because of the extra weight of carrying a passenger, which is totally illegal, and I can't believe I'm sharing that, but anyways, we slipped to the right, and the bottom back wheel got stuck under a log, and I'm trying to power it out, but the more I gave it the throttle, the more deep it dug down. And so I had to hail down Brian and say, "Can you come help me?" And so Brian came over and he hopped off his ATV and we got off and he got on and he flipped it very quickly into 4-wheel drive and easily muscled it right out of that hole. And I remember after we got out of that little jam, feeling nervous. I wasn't nervous because I had made a mistake ATVing. I was nervous because I was the only female adult alone in the woods with a male adult, and I was married to someone else, and he was married to someone else. And I was nervous because deep down, if I was going to be totally honest, something about being alone with another man who wasn't mine made me nervous. Almost as if you're with somebody who makes you feel alive and happy, who also happens to be someone who is attractive, that's just playing with fire. Now, it's easy to fudge that line when you're in college because you're kind of on the hunt to find someone that you want to kind of play with fire with. So it's not really a scary thing on college campuses. But in about 5 to 10 years, most of you in this room will be married, and you will face this question: what do I do with a member of the opposite sex? What should I never do with them? What situations are appropriate and inappropriate? I knew some Christian speakers. Billy Graham would never let himself be alone in an elevator with another woman. Not because he didn't trust himself or trust the other woman, but because, as he said, he never wanted to put himself in a position where a woman could accuse him of doing something. He always wanted there to be at least a third party, a witness. And growing up in a very conservative household, I think I had a belief that since I was female and passionate and a little alive and cared about my body and my soul, somehow, as a woman, I was untrustworthy with a man. And though I don't have any evidence that I'm unsafe around men, I spend time traveling the country and doing one-on-one sessions counseling for spiritual mentorship men. I write a blog regularly where I talk about sexuality and spirituality. I've been open about my struggle with lust and how I've worked to overcome it, which, by the way, little tip, women do struggle with lust, not just men. And I know as I've walked with Jesus, he's helped me walk into confession and healing. So I don't actually have evidence that I'm an untrustworthy person with a man. And yet I felt when I was near Brian, alone in the woods, something about him might make me lose control. And as I analyzed it, I realized if I was honest, it wasn't that I didn't want to go make out with Brian. I wasn't fantasizing anything sexual. It was just the idea of being alone without a chaperone. What would happen? And nothing did happen in the woods. We got out of the ATVs, we had a great time. We met up with Audra and my husband Dale, and we took off in the Jeep on a next adventure. But I've since investigated that anxiety I had, and there is a reason for it. But it is not simply a matter of lust or sin. And before I move any further into this talk, I think we need to get very clear about what lust is and what lust is not. I'm going to use a definition that Jesus offered in the Sermon on the Mount. Lust is when a man or a woman looks upon some other person and imagines themselves making love to them. Someone who is not your spouse. Lust is when you imagine having sex with someone who doesn't belong to you. So that means that things like attraction, enjoying someone else, even thinking someone of the opposite sex is beautiful, these are not necessarily lust. And I know this is an uncomfortable thought because even as I drove into campus, I was waiting to get my parking permit. And there was I wonder if they're even in here. They're probably not. They're probably still working out. But there was two guys and a girl running. And the girl was wearing shirt, shorts, very modest, appropriate running attire. The men were not wearing any shirts, just shorts. And as soon as I saw them, I thought, God made two beautiful bodies. I kind of hope they're in this audience. That would be kind of cool. But I think that's kind of like, ooh, where did she go? She just stepped over that line. But you know what? What I'm going to actually argue in the next 45 minutes, and we're going to do a Q&A at 5 so that you guys have 15 minutes to throw your hardest questions back at me. But I want to suggest that you can appreciate a member of the opposite sex without imagining having sex with them. That's what I'm going to try to argue with you this morning. I'm going to try and give you evidence for that. And I'm even going to suggest that Jesus was able to do that. Okay, let's dive in. Something has happened in American culture that I think a good word for it is called the romantic ghetto. The romantic ghetto, which is an idea that every single time a man or a woman interact, that relationship always leads to sex. This is the Harry and Sally scenario. It's impossible for men and women to be friends. Why? Because of the sex thing. It always gets in the way. Well, this problem, this romantic ghetto problem, which some of you are like, that's not a problem. I think sex is wonderful. But it is a problem because you don't have the time nor the emotional energy to have sex with everyone in the world, number one. Number two, God actually says the best kind of sex is a long-term sexual engagement with somebody who learns you well enough to know your history, to know your desires, to know your fantasies, to know your wants, to be able to read you, and so that you would be able to read them. So if God actually knows what he's talking about, that means that when men and women interact, we have to have other ways we can interact beyond sexually, or better, romantically. Sigmund Freud is responsible for this romantic ghetto idea, and even though I understand if you're a psych major, you're like, Sigmund Freud, he's been debunked, no one takes him seriously. Well, maybe not in psych departments, but Sigmund Freud is still telling you and I what it means to be human, and you can tell by the way movies, sitcoms talk about male-female interaction. There are so few men and women who are friends in movies, in books, and shows who end up staying friends without having some sort of romantic liaison. And the thing that bothers me so much about this narrative, this romantic ghetto narrative, is it contradicts things I know from my life. As a young girl, I'm a little over 25% Hispanic, and in Hispanic communities, those of you who are familiar with them, there's a lot of physical affection that is appropriate. Whenever you greet someone, especially someone who's older than you in your own family, you always give them a kiss on the cheek, and they give you a kiss on the cheek. That's very appropriate. In fact, to not greet an elder with a kiss is seen as disrespectful. So I remember growing up, and whenever my grandpa, who's from Spain, he's actually half Spanish, half French. His family is from Europe. Every time I saw him, I would say, hi, puppy, and I'd give him a kiss on the cheek. He'd give me a kiss on the cheek. And that was completely appropriate and good. Now, he and my grandma, Mama Grace, they would develop this kind of language that they would share with me and my siblings. And it was a special thing. I've never even talked about this. It was it was like a private sign language with our eyes, when we would be sitting, let's say, across from each other and there was a big family gathering, I would sometimes catch my grandma or my grandpa's eye, and they would do this thing where they would look at me, and instead of just blinking regularly like a light blink, they would blink and hold it and open their eyes with a sort of, I see you, I love you. And it was something that I learned to do back at them. So they'd blink at me and I'd blink at them, and there was this deep affection in our eyes to each other. And I remember being in places like an airport or a crowded bus station, and if there seemed to be something chaotic, sometimes I would catch my grandpa, my papi's eyes, and he would do that to me. This quick little, I see you, I love you. His brother, Uncle Ugo, would also do the same thing. And I grew up learning that affection was appropriate between men and women. In our family, it was wanted, it was special, it meant you were seen and loved. But because of Freud, I have been taught to suspect all physical closeness or interaction between the opposite sex. And this isn't something that Freud came out of a book and like banged into my skull. It's just something you slowly pick up. You come of age, you become sexually awakened. You notice the members of the opposite sex. You start to distance yourself a little bit from the male members of your family as if, oh, hi, Dad, nice to see you. And then there's like the Christian side hug, which is like so hard to do well. Hi, John. Oh, it's so good to see you. Oh. And it's like, as women and men, we're like, we know there's sexual stuff happening in other parts of our bodies, so we're trying not to touch the sexual organs with each other's sexual organs, because what might happen? We might incite lust. And so and we get freaked out. And you know, there's nothing so good as just saying that that is an awkward thing in our culture, and we need to talk about that. Yeah, I would love to talk about that more in Q&A. I want to share a little story about something that I think illustrates how each one of us, we have guy friends or girlfriends who are closer or more distant. And depending on the level of closeness, we know what is an appropriate level of physical interaction. And some people are just not touchy people. And if you were like to grab their shoulders and be like, so good to see you, they'd be like, ugh. You know, they'd back away. They wouldn't like that. And some people, you actually need to touch them so they feel loved and wanted. That's part of the way they interact. And usually that goes back to their family of origin and how they interacted with their family. But I want to give a short story of how two different males touched me, and how it was funny because I could tell which one was appropriate and which one wasn't right away. And it wasn't a scary thing. It was just a touch on my arm. But I was walking on a path. We have these things called gatherings where Solation brings 11 people to Steamboat Springs, and we have a week of cultural conversation, spiritual formation. We work together, we eat together, and people go home changed and friends for life. And so we just did one of these 2 weeks ago. It was the gathering Gold, and it was all the leaves were turning yellow, and we were walking down a path, and one of the guys who came was walking next to me, and we were leading the whole group down this path. And I had Finn on my back in one of those baby carriers. And while we were walking, we were having a deep, good conversation. He was sharing some really deep stuff, and I was feeling like I heard him. And as I was walking, all of a sudden, it was quiet for a second, I felt this like light, soft, like smooth, like that would be a caress on my arm. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm gonna have to tell him to please stop that. And I turned to look at him, and he's like, what? And I looked down, and it was Finn's hand caressing my arm. Oh, it was so great, because I could tell him, I thought you were like stroking my arm, and it's my son. But he was so great about that example. It was not inappropriate for my son to do that. He was like, Mommy, you know, it's so sweet. He's only 2.5. Now, if he does that when he's 16, we'll probably have a discussion about that. But at 2, that's so appropriate. And the level of intimacy I have with my son is totally different than the level of intimacy I have with this guy I'm just getting to know in the gathering. So depending on the level of relationship you have with people, that should dictate what you are doing physically. Side hug, front hug, pat on the back. See what I'm saying? So we want to pay close attention to the type of friendship you have. The second problem with Freud, first was that he contradicts personal experience. The second is that Christian history has so many opposite-sex friendships. For those of you taking notes, just jot down this name, Bishop of Geneva, Francis de Sales, S-A-L-E-S. He had an 18-year friendship with a widow named Jane de Chantal. They're actually buried in the same grave together, and their relationship was never romantic. It was a communion of souls, a hungering for God, a closeness, but it was never sexualized. We have a rich history of how men and women can interact, and I'll be sharing more from Jesus' life in a moment. The third problem with Freud is that he totally disregards the command from Scripture where Jesus says, "You are my brothers and my sisters," where he encourages the young men to treat the older women as mothers, the younger women as sisters in all purity. That's 1 Timothy 5:2. So we have a model of family love as our guide as we walk into this kind of scary zone of male-female friendships. There's a book I read called Sacred Union, Sacred Passions, which after this talk, if you want to go deeper, I'd recommend you pick it up. It's by Dan Brennan, Sacred Union, Sacred Passions. I reviewed his book and I wrote about it on my blog, rubyslippers.org, and this talk is lifted directly from that blog post. So if that's something you want to explore more, go there. In that book by Dan Brennan, he shares this quote. This is from Ronald Rolheiser. "Maleness aches for femaleness, and femaleness for male." Now, I have no problem reading that in terms of a sexual aching. That makes a lot of sense to me. But he wasn't talking about that. He was talking about friendship. And I want to go way back to the very beginning of our story, when God said, "I want to put man and woman on the same earth on purpose and see what they can do." Our story does not say that men came from Mars and women came from Venus and then God threw them together and sat back and said, "Ha, have fun." Our narrative says that God put us together on purpose because something happens when a man and a woman works together that shows the world what God is like. There's something in you men that show the world what God is like that I cannot show. And there is something in all the women in this room that show the world what God is like in a way men cannot touch. But something miraculous happens when we link arms and we say, we're going to do this together. It doesn't just happen in marriage. It happens whenever you see a man and a woman working together. There's more in that in my book, Ruby Slippers, chapter 7. There's a very depressing verse in the Bible, Genesis 3:16, where God judges woman to have pain in childbirth. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. As followers of the God of Israel, we have to wrestle with that verse. The short version of what I think that verse means is that men and women will always try to dominate each other unless you bring Jesus in. I think Jesus' goal was to end the gender war, the culture war, the Bridget Jones diary problems. I think Jesus wants to come in and show us how to be friends again. So what does this mean? I believe that this means that the beauty and the attractiveness, the sensuality and the power of each person is something we can appreciate. I want to spend the remaining time talking about 6 ways to cultivate a friendship with someone of the opposite sex. And I hope I can bring up some of the pitfalls and the dangers, but I hope I can also give you some tools to know when your friendships are healthy and when your friendships are veering off into objectifying or becoming predatorial on each other. Number 1, Cross-sex friendships are very similar to same-sex friendships. So let's, from the audience, really boldly consider what are some characteristics of girls and guys when they hang out and they're friends. What are those friendships like? Just think of it. I want you just to yell it out. Friends, like my guy friends, my girl friends, those friendships are like this. They give me this. Just shout them out. Insight. Support. Good stories? That's fun. Someone else. Someone else. Comfort. Fellowship. Perspective. Patience. That's good too. Okay, this is a much larger group than I anticipated. I thought we were gonna have like a little huddle and be able to share our thoughts. So I'm gonna just cut you off there, but if you have notes, you can jot down a couple more things. After you think about your friendships with the same sex, take that list and then try to apply it with your cross-sex friends. I have heard this verse used at weddings a lot, but I think what's fascinating about this verse is actually used in the context of a same-sex friendship. It's the verse in Ruth 1, where Ruth says to Naomi, "Entreat me not to leave you or to go back to my people, for your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." These are the words of a woman sharing to another woman, and we've lifted that and used it only for marriage ceremonies, which is a little, I don't know what the hermeneutics professors would think of that. Even though, of course, it's appropriate, you know, marriage partners are supposed to be friends, yet we can take this kind of dedication and apply it to all our friendships as well. The friendships I have involve intensity and affection, devotion, understanding, faithfulness. They also involve misunderstandings, anger, long periods of frustration. When I talked with Brian that I was going to be writing a post and then speaking about his and my friendship, which has grown since that ATV ride, he shared with me that it's very awkward being friends with a woman, mainly because his parents never had friends of the opposite sex. We don't have a lot of models. We don't get to go around campus and see one male professor having lunch or dinner with a female professor and giving each other a front hug and then say, "Oh, isn't that great?" We're often more suspicious. What is going on? Brian made the point that when we are friends with someone of the opposite sex, it's kind of like, actually, I think this was my example. It's kind of like when you're swimming and you're trying to learn a new stroke and there's no teacher around. You're gonna try it, and if I just actually am trying to learn to swim like a little bit better right now, and I'm finding I'll watch people around me and learn how often I should take a breath and practice my form. But if I didn't have any examples around me, I would look really silly at first. And you're gonna get water up your nose, and you're gonna take some time to learn how to do this. Same with cross-sex friendships. There's not a lot of good examples. We have to go to history. We have to ask the few people who are doing it well. But the more time I spend with Brian, the more I realize I enjoy being with him so much, I'm gonna keep trying. And he's told me he's gonna keep trying too. So, first point, how do you have a cross-sex friendship? Number one, expect the friendship to be similar to your same-sex friendships. Number two, you won't have to force a connection. You don't have to go hunting around Biola for someone to be your opposite sex friend, because that's just kind of weird. You want to find somebody who you naturally click and connect with. And here is the danger. Because you're all in the years where you're waiting and hoping that you're going to find a marriage partner, it's really easy to jump from "we're so good together" to "we should be dating." It's really easy to jump into that, which is slightly confusing because you can only marry probably one, maybe two people in your whole life. And so either you have to cut all the other opposite sex people out of your life completely, or you get to learn now how to be close to them without it being weird. And college is a great time to practice that. So there are going to be people you naturally click with, just like with your girlfriends. And here's where I would encourage your community to start to approach this a little differently. If you see a girlfriend hanging out with a guy who's brand new in her life and you see them having coffee together, don't be that person who says, I saw you guys together. Because that is so annoying. And then the person has to say, oh, we're just friends. And then invariably in 3 months they're dating. You're like, I knew it. So you all need to work with each other on this. Okay, you need to, I love it, I'm getting some witness out there, thank you. Now here's a really good example. I've been married 10 years. This year, a very good friend of mine, a psychologist, she and I have been writing a blog on female friendship for a long time. We got together 2.5 hours away from my house and 2.5 hours away from where she was vacationing. That day, we each drove 5 hours to spend 3 hours together. And people would say things like, oh, that's so cool, you must love her so much, that's so fun, you have such a good friendship. Now let's change the scenario and say, it was Brian who was 2.5 hours away, and he drove 5 hours, and I drove 5 hours to meet together for 3 hours in a town where no one knew us. All of a sudden, the suspicion lights come up in our mind. And people ask questions like, why do you have a need to spend time alone with a man who's not your husband? No one ever asks me that about my friendship with Sally. But the suspicion begins to rise up, not just in you guys' hearts when you look at someone else, but in my own heart and looking at my own interactions with men. And so here are some questions to make sure your friendships with the opposite sex are full of health. Number 1, does this person, man or woman, help me know more about myself, about God, about the world, about my family? Does this person help me grow? The Bible says in Ecclesiastes that friends are a strong shelter, that they're a treasure, that they're a gift from God. The friends you have, male or female, should be people who are growing you. Maybe that's a new concept for you, but it's probably good to begin to implement that so that you can have the type of friends who last long-term in your life. Will these friends grow me? So number 1, these friendships will be similar to your same-sex friendships. Number 2, these friendships should be natural. You'll click, you'll connect, you'll want to be together, and that is a good sign. Wanting to be with a man who is not my husband does not mean I'm lusting for him. Lust is, again, when you desire to have sex with somebody who's not your spouse. Okay, number 3. This is very important. Is this person strong enough for a cross-sex friendship? Because they're, wow, all these deep manly, When I posted this on my blog, I got lots of comments. One from a woman who had endured an affair that her husband had with one of her close friends. And she said, Jonalyn, my husband will never be fit to have a cross-sex friendship. He has to guard every moment when he's with the opposite sex. And I'm not going to tell you what I said to her. You can go on the blog to find out. But my challenge would be that there is nothing that is broken in you that Jesus cannot mend. And my suggestion is rather, when men view women as stumbling blocks, and when women view men as stumbling blocks, that actually harms our ability to stop objectifying each other. If I had not battled through lust, when I came on Biola campus and I saw those guys jogging, I would have had to look away. But I don't have to do that anymore. And there's exercises you can do, like going to art museums and seeing, oh, that is a completely naked woman, and I don't feel at all sexual towards her, but she's still really beautiful. I mean, that's a cool sculpture, that's a cool statue. And you know, most American Christians don't have a lot of exposure to the idea that nudity can be God-honoring, which is why so many of you, when you enter into marriage and have your first sexual encounters, you will feel shame rather than joy. And yet, there is still hope. So, are they strong enough for this? What do I mean by that? Look for men and women you want to be friends with who are versed in delight. Now, what does it mean to delight in someone? Delight means you know how to find the beauty in someone else. It means you can look into the eyes of somebody and say, I see what makes you come alive. I know what you care about. And you can tell if someone is good at finding delight in someone else by looking at the way they treat people who are much older than them and much younger than them. I was sitting here with my nephew before the session started, and I got to interact with him. And I just love watching people who are not mothers and fathers and see what they do towards small children who tend to be loud and in the way, and older people who tend to also be loud and in the way. How are you able to delight in the person who is writing the check in front of you in the line at the grocery store? The capacity you have to do that will automatically transfer into your ability to delight in the opposite sex friend you have who is the same age as you. It will also transfer to your ability to delight in your husband or your wife when they are annoying you, which they will. I have cultivated an awareness of my husband's beauty, and this doesn't always come easily after you've been married for 10 years. I just adore his hands. I love his eyes. He listens so well. He has a sense of humor that will make me laugh even when I'm angry with him, which sometimes is really annoying. And so from my experience with Dale, I've learned that I can express that I appreciate Brian. I can even say he's beautiful without his wife or my husband saying, what is going on over there? He once showed me a picture I showed him a picture I had taken of him at an art museum we had gone to. And I said, look at this picture of you. And he's like, oh man, all I can see is that I have a bald head, which he actually doesn't have a bald head, but anyways, that's a big deal for him that he's losing his hair. And I said, no, look, like, the way you look in this picture, your body is like the ideal body every guy would want to have. And he said, I can't even see that. All I see is a bald head. We were vacationing this last summer, and he was showing my son how to fish, and his kids were around him, and he had taken his shirt off, and he was standing on the dock. And I backed up, and I took my iPhone, and I took a bunch of pictures, because the light was just setting, and I've just picked up watercoloring last summer. And I showed him the picture, and I said, Brian, I'm going to watercolor this. This is such a perfect shot. To be able to appreciate who he is, body and soul, because I've already learned how to delight in other people like my husband's body and soul and not romanticize it, not sexualize it, not objectify it. I have begun to recognize that Brian is not a stumbling block but a friend. And when I watch him and I learn from him, I'm seeing a little bit more of God. Okay, number 4. Once you're friends with somebody of the opposite sex and you find that they're strong enough to learn how to delight in you without objectifying you, what are appropriate things to talk about and what are not appropriate things? I don't think it's fair to say you can't have vulnerable conversations, because that's what friends do. They share things that are vulnerable. However, I would suggest that you should ask yourself, am I sharing this with this man or this woman because I want to form a bond that makes us exclusive apart from everybody else? Or am I sharing this because I want to be known and I want to know them? And here's a perfect way to test your motivation when you're with someone of the opposite sex. If you're talking about something really deep, and let's say your roommate comes along and joins your conversation. Now, of course, you're going to be annoyed because you're in the middle of a point and you've gotten a lot of ground covered to get there. But in the aftermath, as your roommate maybe comes in, and let's assume your roommate is able to have good conversation and isn't derailing the conversation to some drama about their life. So they come in, I know that's asking a lot sometimes, but they come in, they join the conversation, and you start as 3 people to share this deep, vulnerable thing. Is your reaction one of resentment, that the spell has been broken, or is it one of gratitude? Because as C.S. Lewis says, every one of us brings out something different in each other. When I have deep conversation with Brian one-on-one and my husband Dale joins the conversation, instantly something happens to Brian that I didn't see before. My husband brings out something in Brian that I can't. And I've learned to be grateful for that. Rather than like, go away. Ryan and I are having this deep conversation which you can't understand. Okay, that's an immediate, big red warning flag. So ask yourself, am I sharing these things with this person so that we can understand each other or so that we can form a bond separate from everybody else? All right, 2 more. This is one of my favorites to talk about, touching. What can you do with physical tension? I used to have this feeling and this fear that if Brian and I were to touch each other, there would be electricity, like, oh, it's not safe, don't touch him. And so as we got to know each other, we'd vacation together, they'd come out to our place, or Dale and I would go out to their place. Months of talking on the phone or texting, and then we'd get together and meet up again. And I realized as time went by, it was getting really awkward to not touch. Like if I accidentally brushed his arm, oh, I'm so sorry, Brian. Like back away, like there was something powerful unseen in this touching thing. And as we hung out, I realized one of my favorite things to do with Brian is to cook together. He loves to cook, I love to cook, and so we'd often make the dinner for the whole family together. And they have 4 kids, so there's a lot of food. And we'd be in the kitchen, I'd be cutting mushrooms for the pizza or something, and he'd accidentally brush my arm as he'd walk somewhere. And I would always say, oh, I'm sorry. Like there was something illicit in touching. And what I've realized is if I go back to the model of family, there are appropriate ways to touch that are merited by that relationship. When my grandpa came out to visit Steamboat Springs, Colorado, about 3 or 4 years ago, he went to the hot springs and he fell. And he cut his shin pretty deeply. And my grandpa was in his late 70s at the time. And we all went back to the house, and I took it upon myself to clean out his cut, to put the Neosporin on it, and to bandage it. And I told him, don't take the bandage off and put some home remedy on this and end up in the hospital. And afterwards, we had dinner together, and we all went around the table and we shared one of our highlights of their trip out there. And my grandpa said his highlight was when I took time to bandage his cut. And I realized every one of us, no matter our age, no matter our attractiveness by the world standards or not, all of us hunger to be touched with love. And my friendship with Brian is the same way. When I reach over and I grab his arm and I say, you did such a good job, after I watch him do a basketball game and do a great throw, or if I give him a playful shove, all of those are a way for me to say, I see you, I trust you, I trust myself with you, and I've chosen you. Touching someone of the opposite sex always reminds me that we are different, male and female. And we can honor that in the way we touch each other. Okay, final one. What is appropriate in terms of modesty with members of the opposite sex? Now, I have written quite a bit on modesty, and you can read a lot of that in Ruby Slippers, but I have made the case there, and I'm not gonna go deep into it now, but this is the idea generally. Modesty is relative to the level of intimacy you have with someone. So with close girlfriends, I would be totally okay wearing a bikini with them, whereas if I was wearing that same bikini in an elevator with a complete stranger, I would feel totally awkward. Because I don't know the stranger. I don't know what he's doing with my body as he's looking at me. I don't want to be alone with him in an elevator in a bikini. That just doesn't feel appropriate at all. So you need to consider how close you are with that person and their own level of struggle or honesty with themselves. And I'm going to give the example here of Jesus because I think it's the most powerful. There's a verse in, let's see here, John 13, where Jesus took his shirt off, stripped down to the waist, and girded himself with a towel to wash the disciples' feet. When we don't have as many clothes on, like when we wear shorts versus pants, it's an act of vulnerability. Sometimes it's an act of showing off too, but it's also an act of vulnerability because you're revealing more, which means you can be rejected for more. That's why when Mary of Bethany came to Jesus and undid her hair and let it down and poured oil on his feet and rubbed the oil in with her hands, and dried them with her hair, she was breaking so many barriers of appropriateness for women, and yet her vulnerability was praised by God. There's not really a good way to express what letting your hair down as a woman and using it to dry a man's feet was like in those days, but I mean, because hair was considered so sexual. Nowadays, it's like appropriate to wear your hair down if you're going to a fun event or putting it up like in a French twist. Your hair is part of kind of women's decoration. So I'm trying to think of a way that I could update this story, and the best way I can describe it to you is this. Imagine that Todd Pickett's here on the stage. And I'm gonna share this, and I hope this doesn't come back to hurt Todd, but I don't think it will. Imagine that a woman, and I'm gonna let her remain faceless and nameless so that it doesn't turn into an objectifying thing. Let's remember a woman that you all know walks on stage in her bathing suit with a sarong wrapped around her, okay? It's like a sarong is like a covering, like a beach covering. She walks on stage, and Todd is sitting back here. And with you all watching, she weeps, pulls out a bottle of perfume, takes off Todd's shoes and socks, pours perfume on his feet, and then takes off the sarong and uses the covering that was covering her body to dry his feet. How many alarm bells would be going off? What is she doing? This is where I think we see Jesus embrace the sensuality of Mary's gift without reducing her sexually to an object. That showed tremendous love and dignity in our founder. Jesus is by far so dignifying to women. Here's a quote that I think emphasizes it beautifully. Jesus opened the door not only to female discipleship, but to the possibility of men and women interacting without reference to sex. To Jesus, women were more than sources of impurity, temptresses, wombs, servants, hostesses, or whores. Jesus guides me in this quest of how to be friends with a man. And I want to wrap up the last 10 minutes with trying to apply why this topic works for your theme on evangelism this week. Why is the way you interact with a man, women, and men the way you interact with a woman, why is that important to the good news we have to share? Now, if this was a smaller group, I was going to invite you all to share a little bit, but because it's such a large group, I think I'm just going to share with you some of my thoughts. I hope you'll continue to think about it. Number one, there was a man who my husband interacted with at a local church here. If I said the name of the church, you'd all know it. And he said to him, you know, Dale, I just have a really hard time on weekends not going out and just hooking up with girls because, I mean, let's be honest. I have to spread my seed. And my husband was like, this guy is a youth leader. What on earth? And then what I realized is that line, spreading seed, that is a atheistic evolutionary worldview. And the idea is that men need to go out and have as many kids as possible to perpetuate their species, and that women must manipulate and control men to keep some of their hands on the power and the money in this world. This idea of the battle of the sexes, that instead of taking dominion on the earth, we take dominion over each other, is the number one way you see men and women clawing each other down, and I see it all over the place. In college, it's one of the few places you're mostly protected from it because you're kind of in awe of the opposite sex. You're living all in the same area, and you're enjoying noticing and interacting with each other. But just after college, you get into these horrible things called singles groups, and sometimes equally horrible things called marriage groups. And all of a sudden, you have women's teas and men's barbecues, and the women, when they get together, all they do is bitch about their husbands. And you know, just last in 10 years, all of you in this room are going to know dozens of people in this room who are divorced. We're in desperate need to see that the love Jesus talked about breaks apart the atheistic evolutionary story. And there's a better story. And the better you can be friends with someone of the opposite sex, the better prepared you will be to show love, not just to your spouse, but to your children, to your parents, to your grandparents, and to all your friends. When I was, 2 months ago, I was vacationing up in Oregon State with another couple. It was awesome. We were ATVing again. Sounds like I go ATVing all the time, but I really don't. We were on the sand dunes, and the couple that invited us were in their late 40s, and I was working on writing the blog for this talk. Eventually, it became this talk. And I was asking the people we were vacationing with what they thought of cross-sex friendship, the dangers, the possibilities, and I actually point blank looked at the guy who invited us. His name is Bill. And I said, Bill, besides your wife, who is your closest friend who's a woman? And he stopped and he looked at me and he said, it's you. I thought, it's me? I got chosen to be someone's friend who's a guy? And something about that choosing, it resealed the male-female divide just a little more for me. We need the opposite sex to heal because each one of us have been wounded by someone of the opposite sex, probably in junior high. When I was in junior high, I one day took this huge risk and I stopped wearing my hair up in a side ponytail and I wore it down. And I used as much gel as I could put into it, and it wasn't cut. I mean, even when it is cut, you see what it is. And I walked into homeroom, and I sat down, and I felt like I was wearing this huge naqib, like a veil, like a Muslim veil on my face, because I was so hot, and everyone was looking at me. And the guy sitting right next to me, and I can still remember his name, first name and last name. I hope he's not here. If he is, I would like an apology after this talk. He looked over at me, and then he turned to his neighbor who had perfectly straight blonde hair and said, look at Jonalyn's hair. What a fro. And my heart just, And I wish so bad I had a rubber band. I could pull it all back, and I just copied my homework down. And I remember thinking, even as young as 7th grade, he thinks the one thing that is different about me is ugly. And he called, one of the things I'm sure is one of the first things you noticed about me when I walked on stage, he called that unfeminine, coarse, unattractive, unwanted, unbeautiful. And so for the rest of my high school years, I wore my hair pulled straight back, slicked back, tied back, bobby pin back. And it wasn't until college when I met a man who actually went to Biola, who pulled all the bobby pins out of my hair, all the rubber bands, and he fluffed it out really big. And he said, Jonalyn, your hair is so beautiful. Why don't you wear it down? So I married him. Someday he's going to get to tell his side of the story, and that will be good. When I visited Brian recently, I had a radio interview with Midday Connection, and I had to find a quiet place to work, and so he invited me to use his office. He's a principal in a school in New Hampshire. And my husband was taking a writing conference that same time with Image, which is a fantastic writing workshop opportunity. And so my husband was several hours away, and we were both on this radio interview, and we needed to do a Skype session so my husband and I could see each other on the screen to do communication like, keep going, that's a great point, or cut it off, I want to talk. And we were on the phone with the radio company. And so Brian actually gave up his office and let me work in there. And when I walked in the office, he was busy in meetings, and the secretary looked at me like, you want to see Brian? Okay, you can sit down right here. I felt like I was waiting for the principal, like at school. And I just kind of waited there. And when he finally came through the door after his meetings, he looked at me and he said, "This is my best friend." And I remember thinking, I am? Oh my gosh. And so what I want to end my talk with is a challenge to you to do that for somebody, to choose them, to break the ice and discover how much delight you can find in someone of the opposite sex without having to rush into pursuing dating. Practice delighting in each other. And don't expect to have more than one, or if you're lucky, two close friends of the opposite sex. I don't think Jesus had more than two, maybe three. Let's use friendship as a model for our marriages rather than marriages as a model for our friendships. I am going to invite Todd Pickett now to walk around with a mic. Or actually, would you like, let's just have you come up. If you have questions for me, we have a little more than 15 minutes. I invite you to the front here. There are so many things we haven't touched on, but I would like to let you steer the rest of this time together. So come on up.
First of all, I bet you've never heard her talk like that. Let's thank Jonalyn.
Water.
Just a reminder here, we've got about 15 minutes. It sometimes happens in conferences like this that people come up and want to make statements and preach. That's not what this time is for. We've invited a speaker, and we want to show her hospitality by learning from her. So I'm inviting short, brief questions to hear more about her opinion. So please be courteous, as I know you will, and please be brief, and please ask a question.
My name is Andre, and I'm a senior here at Biola. And I was just wondering, I have two questions, and one is, have you or Brian, your friend, ever, maybe you only know this for yourself personally, struggled with desiring an inappropriate connection?
That's such a good question. And you expect me to be honest about that here?
Absolutely. And then the second question I have is, as far as men being visually attracted oftentimes, and going further into that, do you think that emotional connections and relationships sometimes naturally get accompanied by that visual sexual attraction towards women? And so those are two of my questions.
Those are excellent questions. Thank you. It's one thing I love about the Biola community. You guys push me, and I appreciate that. I'm going to take the second one first. My husband and I have done a lot of talking about the power of pornography and why it works. And he and a good friend of ours were having a discussion about why porn draws you in. And I would say this is true probably for women as well, though this is what they said. It's not only a female body that is so hot and so provocatively placed. It is the way this woman is looking at me. Like she wants to be seen, that she wants me to engage. And I think there's something in porn that makes it work, and there's an attempt to create an emotional connection even with that 1 second glance of the photo. I think, and this is something my husband and I work with, our nonprofit is trying to build an appropriate structure for being fully human. And I don't think you can be fully human unless your emotions, your sexuality, your spirituality, your intellectual abilities are all integrated. But I think what is helpful in terms of lust is being able to tease apart how someone may be delightful, you might appreciate them, I'm going to go even so far as to say you might enjoy them, but that doesn't mean you must slip right into imagining making love to them. And you have to practice on people in your family first. Because sometimes people in your family will make you just crack up laughing or just enjoy some moment. You'll think, why can't it always be like this with my family? And you really are enjoying your family, but not a hint of, in healthy families, not a hint of sexual attraction is there. And I have to say that because I know some of you come from a family where that has been abused and has been violated, and I would be very happy to talk with you more about that because I've studied that quite a bit. So I'm not sure if that answers your question about the emotional side to lust, but I think you were kind of asking, do they go together or can they go together? Yes, they absolutely can. In fact, God designed it to be like that. Sometimes when you're married, you don't have like a really desire, sometimes I don't feel like, oh, my husband's body is so hot, I just want to jump in bed with him. I don't feel like that, but because the emotional connection that day was so tight, that is enough to get my train on the track to end up with sex. Does that make sense? So they work together, and women and men, you need to cultivate both of those because when you're married, it's not just enough. You won't just have enough of that sexual heat to drive you to make love, and you will need to because marriage is about making love. Okay, the first question, which is really good. I can't speak for Brian, but we've had very candid conversations about how weird it is to be close and how there's a tension and wanting to make sure we're honoring and pure in our thoughts. I have been floored by how many times I used to think what I was doing was lusting for him when it was actually appreciating that God made him as he is. I've been floored by that. In fact, this last summer we were going to spend 2 weeks in the same house, not just him and me, him and his whole family. And I didn't even give you this side of it. I am very close friends with his wife. She's probably my closest friend. And before I pursued like an intentional friendship with Brian, I talked with her, which is key. And Brian and I both agreed there's no way we could be close if we didn't have such stellar marriages. But in terms of did I feel inappropriate desires with him? It's really good to tease apart, I keep saying this because it's so important, appreciation and wanting to have sex. But I don't think you can ever stop being a fully sexual creature. If you and I went to coffee, there would automatically be a different sort of energy than if I went to coffee with the woman next to you, because we recognize a difference in each other. There's interest there, there's curiosity, there's awareness, there's delight. And we may not have much to talk about. I mean, you and I might not be good friends, but just the actual difference of male and female is something God created in humans that naturally fits together well emotionally and of course physically and spiritually. And I don't think as Christians we have to be quite so afraid of it, as long as we're honest with ourselves. I don't know if that helps. I'd love to talk more if you want to come up afterwards. Yes.
Hi, my name is Carrie. I'm a freshman here. And I have a question about how do you effectively put the brakes on maybe a friendship with a guy or a girl, if you're a dude, without damaging future friendship if they cross the boundaries and you don't want anything else, but you just want friendship? Because I've had a lot of trouble with that in my life, and I just want to be friends with guys, and I'm like, oh no, personal bubble. So how can I effectively save a friendship without damaging a future together?
Okay, great question, thank you. I'm gonna be really honest with you. I have always had that problem too. And what I realized maybe once I got married was my husband said, Jonalyn, the reason there are always men hitting on you is because you're giving out a lot of sexual energy. I am? I'm just being friendly. Well, this is where it goes back to that principle, are they strong enough to be friends? Some men and some women have never had someone of the opposite sex listen to them for more than 5 minutes. And so when you do, it's like, they're the one. They get me. So before you start to woohoo, new friend, consider how do other girls interact with this guy? And watch yourself, because at least for me, I'm very bubbly, I'm very enthusiastic, I look deep in people's eyes, and that's enough for a man to think, wow, she wants me. And I don't. Now, my husband, My husband has cautioned me about this sexual energy thing, and as I've been more honest about my past, I realized that often the thing that made me trigger, maybe a little alarm bell for me with your question, is that you want to be friends with lots of guys. And I would caution you in that because I don't want to be friends with lots of girls anymore because it's just too much time to know all of them well. And it's the same with men. Men have just as much mystery and drama as women. They just hide it. And if you're going to be really close with guys, you're going to have to spend some time figuring out which of these guys are really connecting points for you. Who can see you as more than just a beautiful body or as a potential wife. And they may not be the flashiest guys. They may not be the guys when you walk across campus, everyone's like, who's she with? They may be someone who's easier to overlook. My husband's like that. He's easier to overlook at the beginning, but he has this old soul that I want to grow old with for the rest of my life. And that is enough to drive any passion. So look for men who have this quality of being able to recognize you, listening to you, but also, keep an eye out on how you might be attracting men, maybe because they make you feel good, and that's using men, you know? It's really easy to use the opposite sex. It's really easy to use them rather than love them.
All right. You mentioned how historically cross-sex friendships within Christians were, well, you could argue about whether they were common, but definitely supported. I mean, you've got, Paul and Priscilla, for instance. But you mentioned how, with the rise of Freudian psychology, people have acted a lot more weird towards these friendships and a lot less understanding. My question is, now that, we're in 21st century California, now that homosexuality is becoming more rapidly accepted in mainstream society, do you think that same-sex friendships are running a certain risk for scrutiny in the future?
Excellent question. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I think that we're in danger of all touch being sexualized. I think that it's very difficult for even girlfriends to hold hands without people assuming that they are lesbians. And I think back, it was just 100 years ago, we have friendships like Anne and Diana where they would link arms and hold hands, and there was no question of that. I've written about this in 2 places, theartoffriendship.org. Look up under the search bar, When Girls Hold Hands. I've written extensively on it, and I think you might find some good discussion under that. Great question. It is a danger, but that doesn't mean we can't bring Jesus into it to redeem it. Okay.
Hello. I plan on being a pastor someday, and I know that you talked about Billy Graham and how he said that he wouldn't even be in an elevator alone with a woman.
Yeah.
And then I think about living your life above reproach and not putting yourself in any position, especially as a pastor, of where someone could look at you and say wow, he's doing something wrong. Yeah. So how would you suggest that someone in a place of Christian leadership pursue those opposite sex friendships without looking in some way like they're doing something wrong?
Yeah.
And I also wanted to break one of Todd Pickett's rules and make a statement, and you have beautiful hair.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What was your name? Thank you, Kevin. Well, I think you just answered your own question. You did something publicly that some people might not look on as being above reproach, but you did it boldly. You complimented a woman in public for something about her body. And I don't think anyone in here would doubt your motives. You as a pastor are going to have the opportunity to lead this charge. Most pastors deal with the issue of lust and sexuality by putting women in a box, by reducing a woman to her sexual wiles. And in the process, I think this fuels shame about any thoughts about a woman's body being beautiful. I have been challenged in hundreds of comments on my idea that a man can look at a woman and a woman can look at a man and still find them beautiful without lusting after them. And yet I still hold that line. As far as principles, I would encourage you to have, both my husband and Brian, who have opposite sex friendships, are Christian leaders. So number one, I would recommend that you contact my husband and ask him for a list. I'm sure he has some. But I would even more so recommend that you seek the Holy Spirit out on your areas of weakness. Your guidelines are going to be different depending on how old you are, whether your church is in the South or the Northeast, whether you're married, the strength of your marriage, your own personal honesty about your struggle with lust. It'll be completely different. So I can't give you a specific list, but I can say that if you are honest with God, He will give you more freedom than most of the male leaders around you. And you will be able to use that to witness of the good news to them. But please fight that battle for us.
Hey, so I would imagine you have a pretty good husband who allows you to do this and he trusts you a whole lot.
Yes, that's true. I flew to LA by myself.
Yeah. Oh. I'm just imagining, maybe if you have a husband who's weaker, or maybe doesn't trust you or feels more possessive or sensitive.
Yeah.
How do maybe it's a hypothetical for you, but it's probably more real for a lot of people here, maybe growing up homeschooled or sheltered, or it's kind of shy. So what do you have to say about that?
That's such a vulnerable question. I admire you for asking it. The short answer is, my husband was in exactly your shoes when we were married. My husband struggled intensely with pornography. His capacity to be jealous is just as intact as any other man's. But jealousy, and this is where it's probably important, jealousy can be quite appropriate in a marriage, just like our God is jealous. Husbands and wives should be jealous for each other because their bodies are part of the good gifts for one another. However, unless your spouse has given you a good reason to suspect that they are unfaithful, the area of cross-sex friendships will actually build your love. The more opportunities I have to interact with Brian, the better I appreciate and love Dale. And I'm so glad I'm not married to Brian. Because it's one thing to admire someone's body or enjoy their sense of humor or talk deep stuff, but when you find someone you want to be a life partner with, you will develop a new language with them that will be a sexual language. And it'll be private, it'll be exclusive, and no one else will know how to speak it. And the way you develop that kind of language with your wife or your husband, that will give you the power to trust. But I promise it won't happen unless you talk about it. Talk about your insecurities and your jealousies. I would be very happy to discuss this more if you want to email me. I'm going to actually be in the back. Should we take one more? Okay, I'm going to be in the back afterwards. There's free cards if you want to just connect with us. I have a sign-up sheet if you want to know more about our nonprofit. If you would honor me with your email, you will hear from us regularly, and I can't see you, but I'd be happy to email you more about that. Okay.
Stay in your seats. We have one more question, and then we'll dismiss.
Thanks, Todd.
Okay, my question is regarding the boundaries in a friendship like that. At what point in the friendship, like, do you go and define those boundaries, like, verbally to each other? Do you sit down and be like, okay, so here are the boundaries in our relationship?
Don't massage my back, or what are you talking about?
Or, I mean, like, you said, like, with different people, you have different, things that are appropriate.
Oh, yes, that are appropriate, right.
So,
okay.
like, with my friends, like my girlfriends, like,
Yeah.
there's ones that I'll give a side hug to,
Yeah.
and there's other ones that I won't.
Yeah.
And so where do you go and have that conversation, or do you even have that conversation?
No. Almost always, if you start bringing up the, like, this is appropriate and this isn't appropriate, it automatically enters awkwardness and sort of, like, intense, like, where's it's like a DTR. Right? So even with Brian, he was kind of like, even us talking about our friendship for you to write this blog is really awkward, and it's like, I'm going to be glad when this conversation is over so we can go back to talking about, The Office or philosophy or stuff like that. So the only time it's appropriate to bring it up is when you have found that relationship to violate something that you know they need to be made aware of as a sister. So imagine if they were your sister and they did this, would you tell them? That might give you some guidance.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. Thanks, you guys.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.